Welcome to the Dynasty Vipers ViperCast, where all things football are injected right to your veins, with your hosts, Matt Donnelly, Calvin Shoemake, and Jeff Mueller.
Welcome to the Dynasty Vipers ViperCast. This is episode 49, and today we have the consistency guru of fantasy football with us. We've got one of the original gangsters of fantasy football, dating back to, we're going to talk about this, 1985. I did some research on this. We're going to talk about a little bit of Expos. We're going to talk a little bit of the bit of what you might call it there, the King's Classic, so to speak. You want someone who's in the middle of organizing stuff? We certainly have him with us today. Bob, how you doing?
Doing great. Thank you guys for having me on. Man, it's been an exciting 24 hours. I'm sure we'll talk about why. But always good to be back on here on the Dynasty Vipers. So Matt, good to see you, and Calvin as well. And always excited to be hanging out with our friends up north.
So I'm really excited to have a chance to have you on here. I don't know if you even realize this, but there was a point in time where we podcasted together last off season, and you gave me a nickname. Do you remember what that nickname was?
Calvin and Hobbes?
No, you called me Skinny Grunk. And
I called you what?
Skinny Grunk. We were on like maybe IDP guys or something like that.
Oh, Skinny Gronk?
Yeah.
Oh, okay. Okay, I see it. All right, I got it.
It was like right before he came out of retirement. And for whatever reason, those guys on IDP guys, like it stuck with them. And they still, to this day, like a year later, call me Skinny Gronk.
Skinny Gronk. All right. Well, that I think that's a compliment. I mean, I wish I was called Skinny Gronk. I wish I was called Skinny anything, but yeah, I get it.
Yeah. That was before I put on my COVID-19, but hey, I'll take it. I took it as a compliment.
All right, that's good. I'm glad, because sometimes I say things and I'm thinking people, I'm joking, right? Or kind of, just kind of having fun. On the last podcast I was on with Shane and those guys, kid was on there. I told him he looked like the former lead singer of Spandau Ballet. So, you know what I know. And of course, he's not old enough to know who Spandau Ballet was. So it doesn't work.
Oh, I got a kick out of that there. We had to basically confirm that he was over 21 so that he could come to Canton.
He'd come to the King Classic and drink, because he looks like he's like 14.
Which I wish I could look like that, but
yeah, exactly. Yeah, right.
We can't all look as good as Skinny Gronk over there.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
You can try.
Yeah, we try.
So we're going to talk a little bit more about the Expo. We're going to talk a little bit about the King's Classic, because these are things that I absolutely love. But first, we have to do we're almost contracted out to do this. We don't really have a contract, but it sounds important when we say it. So we kind of have to hit the show sheet, so to speak. And the first thing we got to talk about is consistency and this year's free agency class. I don't think we know exactly who's all going to be a free agent yet. I think we're going to see about a lot of good players get cut in the next little week leading up to free agency, but the official illegal tampering has begun. Legal tampering starts next week, but illegal tampering is already underway. Are there any free agents right now that you're looking at that have that consistency profile that you want on your roster?
Well, actually, there's quite a few of them. I mean, let's start with Aaron Jones. Green Bay letting him walk. I mean, maybe A.J. Dillon's better than I think he is, and obviously we didn't see him play much. But they don't want to pay Aaron Jones, which is very surprising. He's done nothing but produce. In consistency last year, 80%. 2 years ago, he was second in total points. He was fifth this past year. But the most impressive thing was 2 years ago, he didn't have the consistency. It was about 70%, which wasn't bad, but you should have better than that when you're number two in total scoring. But we all know he had 19 touchdowns. So we expected regression in the touchdowns, which he did. But the thing was, he became more consistent from doing that. So I don't understand why they're letting him walk. I mean, I think any team that can get a hold of Aaron Jones right now in his prime, For the next 3 or 4 years, it's going to be great. Whether, I've heard everything from Tampa Bay, which she's talking about him, somebody had Super Bowl trophy back, to wherever, in Miami. And I think any place will be, he's going to be the star. He's going to be the guy getting the ball, all 3 downs, and he's going to be a very productive running back one. So definitely love it.
So what would be the ideal spot then? Like for him to maintain that type of consistency, do you have like in your mind, like where the right place for him to go would be?
I think wherever he goes, he's going to be consistent. Because let's be honest, he was consistent in the Green Bay offense where he was only used 62% of the snaps 2 straight years. And yet he was top 5 in total points, top 5 in consistency last year. And yet he still was, like I said, sharing, at least 35% of his snaps with Jamal Williams and maybe occasionally A.J. Dillon. So if he goes anywhere, he's got to be getting more than 65% of the snaps, you got to believe, whether it's Tampa or Miami or Arizona, I've heard. Any of those places, he's going to be the guy, and they're going to pay him to be the guy, and they're going to give him the opportunity. So I don't see where he doesn't become a very consistent player, running back one, heading into this coming year.
So we got the running back position. Aaron Jones is kind of the holy grail of the running back position, so to speak, right now.
Right.
There's a bit of a drop off. Is there anyone that you're looking for, perhaps as a receiver, that has that consistency profile? We know that Allen Robinson got tagged, so
right.
You can take him off the table right now. Chris Godwin got his tag, so it's not quite as sexy, so to speak. In fact, Curtis Samuel kind of gets bumped up a little bit as far as the wide receiver rankings are concerned. Is there anyone that catches your eye, or a couple guys that catch your eye?
Well, the one that certainly has the catching the eye of everybody right now, because Detroit Lions said that they don't want him back and they aren't going to re-sign him. That's Kenny Golladay. And again, this is kind of like Aaron Jones at the wide receiver position. This guy has been a consistent player in Detroit for the past 2-3 seasons. He is was the wide receiver one. He had a nice alternative on the other side of him with Marvin Jones, who also is going to walk. So again, wherever Golladay goes, I don't see how he doesn't become the wide receiver one there and produce at a very high level. Unless he, somehow ends up with just a bad, like if he goes to Miami and the quarterback situation's not as favorable, but I've got to believe if he goes anywhere where he can be the primary target for a good, even a decent quarterback, I think that's going to be beneficial. And who knows, maybe he ends up, there's talk about, players moving around. Who knows where Golladay end up? Heck, maybe he goes to the Rams and play with Stafford. I don't know.
When you look at developing that consistency guy and coming up with that formula, do you take splits into the whole equation here? Like say Juju Smith-Schuster, he's a very intriguing player for me because with Antonio Brown, his production was actually better. Without Antonio Brown in Pittsburgh, that consistency, so to speak, when he was the alpha, kind of dropped off. He's a really interesting one. What does his consistency profile speak of going into the offseason?
Well, obviously this past year was better for him because of the fact that Big Ben got to play for most of the season. But, they also had DeAndre Johnson, they had Chase Claypool, so they had a lot of alternatives there, which, made Juju decent. He certainly wasn't the 80% like you said he was when Antonio Brown was around. Now he's going to be a free agent. We haven't heard whether or not he's going to walk or whether Pittsburgh going to let him walk, but I assume they will because they've got some studs below him. And what's the point of paying him? So, he could go somewhere. Again, I don't know where the perfect spot is. Maybe he goes to Indianapolis, where they've got Carson Wentz now. I think he's a very talented wide receiver. I think he'll regain that consistency, getting more targets, being the man again. I think there was just a lot of scenarios going on in Pittsburgh where they weren't just using him like they used to. And I think they were trying to maybe show that, hey, we got guys who are just as good as you, if not better. So maybe that was the way Pittsburgh was trying to angle that for future signing purposes. And I just don't think they're going to sign Juju, but I think he'll be very productive wherever he goes. He's a very talented young receiver.
And then at the tight end position, for me, the two top tight ends, Robert Tonyan, we're not going to talk about here right yet because he's a restricted free agent. But the two top tight ends in this class both have injury concerns. When we talk about Jonnu Smith and Hunter Henry, can they get past that and maybe sustain consistency?
I think any good tight end always has issues with staying because they got to block, and when you're in that line of scrimmage, you're always going to have issues with, people hitting your legs and you're coming across the middle and taking hits. And it's a tough position. We all know that. And very few can be as elite. Hunter Henry has been consistent when he's on the field. That's always been the key. Jonnu Smith, pretty much the same. If he can be healthy and he can stay healthy in the right scenario and the right schemes, he can certainly be a very productive tight end. Again, not to beat the dead horse in the Colts, but man, Hunter Henry in Indianapolis with Carson Wentz, it's kind of like tying him back up with a Zach Ertz type player. Certainly would be a very productive scenario for Hunter Henry. I'm not sure if Jonnu Smith is a good a fit in the Colts. Maybe there's another spot for him somewhere around. I don't know where that is. Maybe Arizona would be a nice spot. They've never seem to have a good tight end there. Maybe that he goes there and, hooks up with Kyler Murray. So some definite alternatives. I think they both have the talent. It's going to be just, schemes and targets and all the kind of things we all look forward to. That's what we're going to have to wait and see where they go in the offseason.
Mike is our resident Colts fan, which is so he likes you saying that he's going to Indianapolis, which obviously is pretty good. Another place is potentially with Russell Wilson, who is kind of the product of his own controversy right now. Between him and Deshaun Watson, there's a lot of trade rumors. As you start to think about how teams are starting to build, free agency. Dak just got locked up. Now you're looking at Jameis Winston and guys like that being the best available quarterback. So a team that needs a quarterback, they can start really trying to push in now and go after one of these guys. Do you think it's possible that Deshaun Watson or Russell Wilson gets moved in the offseason?
Watson, I think yes. Wilson, I'd be surprised. I just can't imagine him not in Seattle. Stranger things have happened, but I think Watson pretty much is done with the Texans personally. He could pull a Le'Veon Bell and just say, I'm just not playing and just sit. And, I think if Houston's smart, they try to trade and get something of value for him and kind of start over. Let's be honest. What is there to build around in Houston anyway? David Johnson's getting older every day. Will Fuller could only stay healthy because he was on, PEDs. Brandon Cooks is probably their only real talent they have. That team's kind of a hot mess. So it might be time just to junk the whole system out and just start over and take a bunch of draft picks and, start rebuilding in Houston. I don't see that happening in Seattle. I just, I'm sure he's unhappy and I'm sure, he doesn't like the way sometimes, their coach seems to abandon him for the run and, but that's the way Pete Carroll's always been, and he should know that. So I don't know why it surprises him, but yeah, it's going to be interesting. But I think when push comes to shove, Watson will be the one that might hold out and either not play or actually get traded.
So we reached the point in the show where Matt goes on mute and forgets and then starts talking. So that was your little brief moment there. And back to your regularly scheduled program.
So now that we're back to a regular scheduled program, Bob, put your GM hat on. You're going to bring in Rue there as your IDP consistent guy. You guys are going through your magazine. You're kind of trying to figure out Wilson or Watson. Who are you bringing in as your quarterback?
In a typical redraft, I think I would go Watson, just because I think that he certainly has the legs, as does Wilson, but Wilson doesn't run. And in fact, Watson's a little bit younger too. That's probably what I would go with. Wilson certainly has the talent, and I guess all of it depends on what you have as a team. If you have a good team that can win this year, maybe it's Russell Wilson to take you to the championship game. If you've got 3 or 4 years before that team builds to a title team, then maybe Watson's your guy.
Well, Matt, Bob, I think that's enough NFL talk for tonight. I think we've reached our quota. We've fulfilled our obligation. Our contract is done. And now we can talk about the real main attraction, and that's you, Bob. We're going to talk about you a little bit, get to know you. And the first question that I've been asking everybody, and this is just a little peek into your soul right here. What would your intro music be? So if you were a wrestler or a closer or coming up to bat, whatever it is, like what would be that song that they play as you come out?
This is the easiest answer of any question you're going to give me of the night, and that would be Kickstart My Heart by Motley Crue.
Nice.
You can never go wrong with the Crew.
Just that beginning with the revving of the engine, the shifting, it's just one of those, that's the song that will rev me up the most, and that's always my song.
All right, we got Tommy Lee pounding away on the drums. We're getting ready. You hear the engine roaring. You hear the gears shifting. It is now the Kings Classic NFL-style combine. Bob, you're in your tighties right here. You're in your underwear. You're getting ready for the Olympics. Marcus Grant's there. Curtis Patrick. Everyone that's in this
Mike
Kings
Clay.
Classic. Oh, yeah. Man. There's so many people in this Kings Classic. We're all getting together. We're hitting the field. We're getting ready for our 40s, our bench press. Which one of these guys in this Kings Classic combine is going to impress the scouts?
Physically, it's not me. I can tell you that. I have a torn Achilles right now.
Well, I trust you'll kill the interview or even the Wonderlic test.
Yeah. I'll get the Wonderlic because I'm an accountant. So, but then again, so is Mike Clay, so might be rough. All of these guys, they're just. I tell people the reason I put this together because this is the only way I can compete against these guys because I would never be invited on my own. But they're all so respectful, helpful. Just I needed a question because we have a couple openings in the Blanda division, and so I sent a DM to Andy Behrens, Brad Evans, Mike Clay, Dave Richard. Now, these are the 4 biggest fantasy guys in the world, basically. Outside of Matthew Berry and a few others, but within 5 minutes, all 4 of them answer me. That to me is respect. I'm Bob Lund from Canton, Ohio. I'm not. If they're the number 1 draft pick and top 4 draft pick in a fantasy expert draft, I'm a wide receiver 5. So just the fact that they even respond at all is, just means a lot to me. And that's the way they are. They'll talk to any of you guys. When you guys come into the Kings Classic and they're all having beers, they'll chat with you and listen to you and talk to you like, they're your best friend. And that's what's great about them. And so that's what we enjoy. And that's what this Kings Classic and the Expo and the whole weekend is about in Canton, Ohio. Is, we've got the Pro Football Hall of Fame. We have the epitome of, football. Why not come there and make this fantasy football's greatest weekend? And that's always been my goal. So really excited about it.
Well, I love that you mentioned you threw this email out to these the heavy hitters of fantasy football, the Mount Rushmore of fantasy football. So
yeah.
I got a hold of your email list because somehow you invited me to represent Canada in this whole thing. And so I kind of threw out a couple emails to a couple guys, and that's basically how this Behind the Grind show really got going. We threw it out there on Twitter. We got a couple big names right off the get-go. And I was like, oh, man, how am I going to top this? How am I going to get past this? So I'm like, well, let me kind of go through one of these old email threads we have from the Kings Classic. And I threw some names out. Hey, so-and-so, we're doing this show. Would you be interested? And I would say 75% responded almost immediately. Yeah, I'm in. Let's set it up. Set up a date. We'll get going. I'm like, oh, really? That easy? Yeah. But you're right. It's fantastic, the response that you get. And it kind of talks more of a testament to the character of the individuals who do come to this event themselves.
Yeah, definitely.
But I'd be very interested to see who would win the 40-yard dash boat. Everyone goes. I know it's not going to be me because I'm pulling a hip.
I would probably go with somebody like Curtis Patrick. He seems to be in pretty good shape. Seems to be athletic. Looks like he works out he'd be up there. Marcus Grant's probably pretty fast.
He looks like he's a long strider.
Yeah, he's a taller guy, so probably a long strider. Like you said, looking at the younger dudes, that would be probably two guys I would probably think would, from a combine standpoint, certainly be up there as one of the top from a skill standpoint.
I do think that this needs to be part of the Expo, though. Maybe not quite like the 40 and stuff, but throw some sort of nice.
Okay, well let me drop this secret on you because nobody knows this. So I don't know if you guys know. So we have the Hall of Fame, and they are now building what they call the Hall of Fame Village around it. The idea is to make it like a Cooperstown. If you've ever been to Cooperstown for baseball, shops, walking down, little streets and, all kinds of things in restaurants and hotels and bars and just all kinds of cool stuff. One of the first things they're doing is building a kind of like a press box booth at the end of the stadium. And that press box booth is going to be there not only for games and people can sit and watch them, but they're going to use it for events and parties and that kind of stuff. So I was talking to the vice president of operations of the actual village, and I was explaining to him what we've been doing with the Expo and the Kings Classic and that kind of stuff. And he said, well, think about this for 2022. You do the Expo or you do the Saturday night party at the stadium in the press box, and you can go out on the field and kick field goals and throw balls around, and there's your combine. So could be more true than you think, sir.
Oh, man, I can't see what could possibly go wrong with 40 and 50 year olds.
Alcohol and football. That'd be cool.
We got a good thing is with the fantasy football community, there's a few doctors and PTs now involved compared to when we first started. Yeah. So
right, that's true.
A few of them invited, and we might be okay.
Yeah, I'll get my buddy Dr. Brandon Bowers from Columbus. He'll be up for it this year, and I'll say you're probably going to need you on the sidelines. So tear my other ACL or something.
Maybe get Gene Bramall an invite or somebody like that to make sure they're there to help everybody. But
right.
You mentioned the Mike Clay and those guys of the world as being first-round picks. You mentioned you being a wide receiver 5. So somewhere up in the nosebleed section is me and Matt just watching the game. And that's a great place to be, right? Because we all kind of fell in love with sports from that perspective. We love sports. We love, and I think as kids, you start falling in love with this game before you even get into the fantasy and all that. As a kid, did you love sports? What was the importance of being in sports for you?
Yeah. So, the problem I had is that I had the intensity, I had the knowledge, and I had speed. Beyond that, being 5'3" and maybe 100 pounds soaking wet, you don't get to play the big sports. Now I grew to be 5'9" by my senior year. So let me just say that I never got to play on a football field. I played backyard football, tackle football with the guys, no pads. Sure, I was there. I mean, did it all the time. Did play baseball from ages 8 to 12. That's where my competition or my competitiveness was learned. I played for a little league team for 4 years, and we went 88-8 for 4 years. We won all 4 league championships, and we're the best team in the county for 2 straight years. And we were from a town of less than 500 people.
Wow.
So we were competing against the bigger area schools, and yet we still won all that. So I didn't know how to lose. Losing wasn't even in my book. I had no idea. It's so, that made me very competitive moving forward. But again, the problem was that I was too small to play, tackle football. I was too small to play, organized basketball in high school. So I played golf, and that's what I was very good at. And my dad was into it. My grandparents were into it. So I played golf. So I was on the golf team and the chess team. So you can imagine the chicks were throwing panties at me like there was no tomorrow. So I was really good at those 2 things. That didn't work out so well. But, I had a great high school. I had great friends. We went to everybody's games. I went to my buddies who played football, and went to my buddies that played basketball, and we were at every game and cheered them on, and we were their biggest fans. So, but that's small town USA, Midwest. That's the way you do things. So yeah, that's where the sports came in. I always loved watching it, always loved learning it, always studied the game. I don't know a, spider wide 2 banana versus a, Tampa 2, but, it's not what I created mathematical formulas for consistency. So
nobody does.
But there's people that are very good at that, and that's good. That's what we need those people too. So, but yeah, that's kind of my little growing up history of sports.
Who were your teams? Like, who'd you root for?
Well, I'm from Northeast Ohio, so all the Cleveland teams, obviously the Browns, and we certainly had some very good teams, especially in the '80s. We just never could make it past John Elway and those guys. But my second team, kind of in the '70s, when I was a teenager, were the Oakland Raiders, because first off, they always won. Second off, they were the team that could beat the Steelers every year because the Browns couldn't. And I just love the Al Davis, just win, baby. You looked at the players and they're all seemed like has-been players like Kenny Stabler, Matuzak, and, Pete Banasak, and, Dave Casper, who did become a Hall of Famer. My favorite player was Fred Blitnikoff. To me, he epitomized what I liked, what I felt like if I was ever going to be a football player, that's who I wanted to be. I was Fred Blitnikoff, great hands, great concentration, not the fastest guy, not the quickest guy, but I could make catches, just because I always had really good concentration and, got in the right place for the quarterback to throw to and playing backyard football. But I mean, still, poor Ernest Biner, I hear you. But, so that was my other team. So it was kind of fun to root for both. During that era, the Indians, the Cavs, again, the Cavs had some great teams in the 1980s. Problem was Michael Jordan got in the way. So, always a lot of pain and agony. Everybody, talks about the Cleveland pain and agony of the shot and the fumble and the drive and, all that kind of stuff that was associated with it. But, it is what it is. And, you have to learn how to lose too. So I watched that quite a bit too, growing up. So.
I love how you mentioned that the Raiders were your second team there. It's kind of that whole enemy of my enemy is my friend type thing, right?
Right.
But you're a bit of a football historian as well. You kind of follow the game. You understand all these teams. Like for me, I wasn't in the 70s, but I fell in love with the 70s Raiders teams and their stories. You mentioned some of their names. Elzado comes to mind. Tatum comes to mind. Stabler studying the playbook by the jukebox light. Like these guys were a different breed altogether. And for me, being a bit of an outcast myself growing up as a kid, I was like, that's what drew me to that. The silver and black didn't hurt either, but the stories that you heard, and like I came much later, but I was like, this is my team. This is the guys I'm going to root for. Mm-hmm. You also mentioned you have that little bit of I won't say a chip on your shoulder, but that competitiveness. Does the competitiveness ever come out during the auction draft of the Kings Classic? Like,
my competitive comes out when I'm playing Tiddlywinks against my grandmother. So, yeah, and they all have that same attitude. When you're bidding on a player and you think I'm going to sneak this guy through, and next thing you know, you were hoping to get him for $10 and you're at 25. Yeah, it shit gets real fast. And there's a lot of yelling. But that's the fun of it, and that's why I love the live drafts, because, the Zoom COVID world, just you don't have that same effect versus sitting in a room and, trash talking and yelling at somebody for bidding you up and all that kind of fun stuff. So, yeah, it gets real competitive.
Well, I love that one little glitch. It's like you sit there and everyone's bidding on a person, and then all of a sudden, okay, it's $1 at a time, $1 at a time, $1 at a time, and there's always that guy that goes 20, enter, and the next guy goes $1. You're like, no.
Yeah, right.
I don't know how many times that happened when we did it on our end of things, and if I would have had a laptop, it probably would have been thrown across the room at least twice.
Yeah, that happens. Yeah, it's a little bit easier to manage that, like you said, when you're doing it live, because you don't have the computer glitch scenario of, you're clicking one. Oh, damn, somebody put 20 and I clicked one, but that's also fun of, kind of the scenario.
So before I get to my next question here, like kind of run through this draft room right now. You guys got your separate rooms. Is there a live auctioneer doing this? So you guys got a professional auctioneer coming in, and you got guys.
I wouldn't call him professional, but
yeah.
No, so we Brad Evans has a friend who he's known for a long time, and he lives in the Canton area, Cleveland area, and he's come down for it, and he runs the auction. He does a very good job, keeps it moving, and that works out best. So it's somebody that can be, biased, but also fair. So, he'll say going one, there's no hesitation. It's going once, going twice. And if you don't bid, it's gone and you're done. But that's what makes it fun and having a live, and, Sirius XM Fantasy Radio is there, they usually have some mics in on it so they can listen in and kind of hear the banter, which makes it kind of cool too. So, but yeah, it's a live auctioneer.
So the Kings Classic is only a few years old. Just want to get that up there.
There it is.
There it is. There's that beauty right there. The good old lion there with the COVID mask on, which was
that was my idea. Thank you.
Obviously, this has only been going on for about 3 years or so, I think, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah,
it's not your first rodeo as far as fantasy football goes. Do you remember what that first fantasy league was? What sport? I'm assuming it was football, but maybe it was baseball.
No,
did you call up Bob Harris and go, hey, I need a 1-800 number here. Here's my fax machine. How'd that all work out?
So 1985, one of my longtime school friends, elementary school friends, lived literally like 2 blocks from my house in hometown, calls me up and says, hey, I went to a bookstore and I bought this little book. And it literally was like a little book. It wasn't like a full size. It was like a pamphlet type book. And it was just called Playing Fantasy Football. The gentleman's name was Chris Charpentier. He said, I read through this. I want you to read through it and see if you think this is something that we could get all of our buddies to do. I read through it and I said, yeah, it's brilliant. I said, I love it. Let's do it. Now, at the time, I worked for an accounting firm, a big 4 accounting firm in the nation. We did have PCs, with floppy drives that could store a whole, 520 meg on. And so we had a Lotus 123, which was before Microsoft Office, for those you kids keeping track at home, that I did the Excel and I created a 1-page sheet with the standings, the scores, and we did a touchdown only and for the 1985 season. So, of course, the guy who had Dan Marino won the league because he threw 50 touchdowns. Or 48 or whatever it was that year. And we did the draft in the Pro Football Hall of Fame. Why? Was because it was in our hometown. We thought it'd be cool. So we actually called our league the Hall of Fame Fantasy Football League, or the HFFL. And that league still exists today. So 7 years later, still touchdown only, just because we wanted to keep tradition. And I think 7 or 8 of the original owners are still in it.
Wow. So you guys, this league that started back in 1985 is still up and running.
Still exists.
That is amazing. So that kind of brings – what is your favorite league then? Does this have like that special spot for you, or is there another league that you kind of have that your favorite league to participate in, I guess? Home leagues are a different bird altogether, because I know my redraft home league with my buddies has kind of got that special place for me.
Oh, sure.
Is there one for you in particular?
I mean, obviously the HFFL, has a special place in my heart just because it was the first and still exists, and it's still our friends. The sad part is that we haven't been able to get together for a number of years now. A lot of guys have moved out of state. But we didn't want to lose them from the league. So we kind of moved to a virtual thing. But, I would be lying if I didn't say this Kings Classic thing is obviously the one that, I want to win the most. It's the most prestigious. And not because I created it, but because of who's in it and who I'm competing against. I mean, I certainly have been in leagues against those guys. I've been in a league, the Huddle, if you've heard of the Huddle, David Dory. I've been in their league, auction league, probably for 16 years. Won that 3 or 4 times, and certainly has a special place. But it's Bob Harris, David Dory, a lot of big names in that one. That over the years. But I just enjoy competing. I mean, I'm usually in 30 leagues every year because I can't say no to anybody. This year was a terrible year because of COVID and injuries and that. So hope to get back to my winning ways. Not as good as it's been, but that's always my goal, is to make the playoffs. I mean, I always say the consistency model is there to get you to the playoffs, because if you're more consistent, you win a couple more games, that gets you in, and then you have a chance at the championship. But I just those two definitely are my 2 favorites, and not that the others aren't, but certainly those. If I had to pick 2, those that home league and the Kings Classic certainly is right there.
So you mentioned the touchdown only league. You talked a little bit about the Kings Classic, obviously. For people who don't know, maybe you can talk a little bit about that format. But do you have a favorite format? Like, is there one format that you like to play over others?
I think just because all of my numbers for the consistency all kind of tie to your typical 1 point per PPR, and that's what most leagues are like. I think that's the one I just feel more comfortable with. I never feel comfortable in these crazy Scott Fishbowl first downs and, number of shoelace tied for the week. And, I just lose track, I'm just like, what? I just picked the same guys I would have picked in any other league. It's not that they're not fun. It's just that I just feel like I just feel lost. Like if I would win, I wouldn't be any more impressed with that if I was dead last. Because I'm like, I got lucky because I obviously picked the right guys that just happened to match up with those stats. But again, nothing against Scott Fish and his amazing thing, but it just not confuses me, but it just catches me off guard because I'm so used to it. Like my brain is programmed to these numbers and this consistency and stuff, and that's all PPR based. And so it just makes it tough. I kind of like the standard PPR.
Any IDP or pickers?
So I've tried some IDPs. I actually got into an IDP listener league. I think Hollywood was Hollywood. I forget his last name, and it was full IDP. So it was not only your typical starting offense, but you had 2 cornerbacks, or 2 safeties, 3 offensive or defensive line DLs. You had 2 DEs. I was in it. I think I was dead last. I didn't do very well. Now obviously, Rui, our boy from Brazil, helped me out, and I used some of his stuff to draft, but I kind of just lost focus on it and just couldn't keep up. Again, special way, special thing, for those who do it and live it, just like I live consistency. It takes a special person to kind of really get into it, really understand it, really dive into it. And that's a little much for me when I'm playing in 30 leagues. Maybe if I only did one IDP league, I certainly would be a lot better at it, I'm sure. But again, to each his own. And I'm glad that they tried different things, and, guillotine leagues and survivor league, fantasy leagues. I mean, I think it's all cool to do different twists in it, but it's tough when you're running that many leagues, and then you got multiple formats too.
Yeah, we had Ryan on talking about his guillotine leagues and all that. Really interesting to hear him, the creative ways he comes up with different things to do and all that. But, at some point, the fantasy bug hits us and we want to play fantasy, but then, I'm Calvin and Hobby. I have fun doing this. It's not my full-time job. At some point, you decided hey, I'm going to make this what I do, right? So what was that transition like? At what point did you say, this is what I want to do?
Well, so in 2002 is when I came up with this idea for the consistency, because my team was 500 for the year and I was the second highest scoring team. And I said, man, if my team was just a little more consistent, it would have worked out. And then, I'm a CPA, which is a certified public accountant. I'm an accountant by day, have been forever. So the number crunching, light bulb went off, and I started doing that and came up with my own calculation. And then, that's all came into what I've got to today. I didn't start the concept to decide that someday I'm going to make money doing this. In fact, for probably 17 years, I didn't make any money at it. I was writing for various big sites like Roto Expert and CBS and Fanball and some of these. And, you might get a few $100, maybe an autographed jersey of somebody, whatever. You did it because you loved doing it and you were getting hopefully street cred, that kind of stuff. But about 5 years ago, I just finally decided, look, I'm just going to start my own site. I mean, I'm the only one that seems to kind of get this consistency thing at the time. And all the other sites just kind of pushed me to the background. Like they didn't want to make me into a focus point, even though it was something new and different and I was winning with it. So I decided, well, the only person that's going to sell me is me. So I went and started my own site. About that same time, I had been writing one article for kind of like a consistency article for various magazines that were on the shelf each year. And I said to them, look, I got this idea that I'd like to create consistency profiles and give them to you to put with your profiles to kind of let you expand your scenario for your readers. And they're like, you don't have enough room for all that. We barely have enough room for our own stats. And so I'm like, oh, okay. And then somebody mentioned something like, well, why don't you just write your own book and, you can self-publish on Amazon. Okay. So long story short, I did that. And a couple years in, I finally decided that, I liked what I was doing. Some other people were buying it. I mean, I think I only sold like maybe 65 copies the first year, and second year, I think it maybe went over 100. And I'm like, okay, I'm going to submit this to the FSWA to see if they think it's a good magazine. And within 2 years, I won Best Fantasy Football Publication, and now I sell about 2,000 to 3,000 a year. I'm still stunned that I was picked to be nominated, let alone win, because I'm being nominated against folks like CBS and Bio Football Diehards, and 4-time nominated. Thank you. And so, all of a sudden, it's like, oh, I'm, and it's still a side gig. I mean, I don't know if I'll ever make enough to quit my job as an accountant. And that's okay, because, my kids have moved on. I have 3 daughters, and they're all in their 20s and either married or, got their life together. And so this is, what I do. And the Expo kind of came along with that. I just came up with, always wanted the dream of having, what I, Pro Football Hall of Fame they always called their weekend, football's greatest weekend. That's always been their tagline. So I always said, well, I live in Canada. I should create fantasy football's greatest weekend, because that would be a cool idea. And so that's where it all kind of came from. Like just a dream that 2019, somebody threw out the idea that they went to the sports con or whatever the thing was in Dallas, and they said it was terrible. And man, I wish somebody would put together a fantasy football expo that would be, for us, that we could come to, and it wouldn't cost, I think a booth was like $2,500 for the cheapest booth to go to that thing. And I'm like, well, why don't we just come to Canton? We'll just do it the same weekend as we're doing the Kings Classic, and we'll just kind of combine the thing. And so I did, and we pulled it off, and we did okay. I think I lost money on it, but I didn't care. It was just like, it was fun. So now this year we're going to do it again and get people back together. And that's kind of how it all just became kind of a little business. It's not buying me any Porsches or, Lear jets, but it's fun.
I think that's going to signify a return to normality, so to speak, when people can finally get back together in fantasy football and get together. I think that's why we're seeing such a huge interest right now, more than anything. It's like, oh, there's that light. There's something for us to kind of gear towards. And it amazes me that, Bob, you may be the only person that gives away more copies of your magazine than you actually sell. Every fundraiser I ever see, I see consistencies guides being given away to people who donate to a good cause. I know that charitable aspect is very important in your everyday life and fantasy as well.
Yeah, no, it always has been. I mean, to me, I've always said if I can help those that are less fortunate or help people in that situation and somehow, giving away copies of the consistency guide will allow somebody to give $20 to something, and it's a PDF copy. It's not costing me anything to print. Give away as many as you want. That's fine. And so I'm always more than happy to do that and, go on potathons and help out because, if that means something to somebody that, oh man, I get a consistency guide and I've always wanted to read this and, for $20 and it would have cost me 10 anyway. Fantastic. If that helps that, I'm all in, and, so I think it's great that so many more people now are using the fantasy community to raise money for various causes because, man, what a perfect way to do this. There's 60 million people plus that play this sport and play this game. And, Twitter and this community has done some amazing stuff. I mean, Scott Fish all started it, 10 years ago. And, I think we all kind of went, oh, that's interesting. Going to raise money using fantasy. Okay, well, that's fine. And look where he's come. And, I think he is set the stage for it. I mean, to show that, hey, we can do this. And it doesn't matter who you are. I mean, Sal Lito does his thing. You guys do stuff. I mean, more and more people are trying to do that. And, at some point I've always thought, well, I should try to do something like that. But I'm like, nah, it's more fun helping everybody else. So,
Well, you got enough on your plate already with everything that you've done on the side.
Yeah.
That's probably a little too much.
We make a donation to a charity for King's Classic. Now, last couple of years, that charity just happened to be our executive producer, Rob Tuzet, and I won't even get into it because it makes me cry. But, we've helped him out and his family the last 2 years. So, we're always looking for, ways to, raise money, and we do that through the King's Classic. I mean, basically, you win a King's Classic, you win like $200 or $300 if you win the league. It's not about that. Yeah, in fact, last year we gave all the money to Rob and his family. So the winner got a pat on the back, which is I'll take that any day. But yeah, I've always enjoyed helping any way I can.
You've been doing this for a long time. There's no doubt about that. You've been doing podcasts, interviews, probably just as long as you've been in the whole industry. What's your most memorable interview that you've ever done? Is there something that you're like, man, did that just really happen?
I don't know if I can. If one jumps out at me, I think the ones that probably do are the ones that I've been interviewed by somebody that I look up to, like last year, somebody like Marcus Grant had me on, NFL Network podcast show that's, seen by a lot more people than we have on ours. So that always certainly hits, but I just, I'm always just honored that anybody asks me to be on anything because I feel like, again, I know that people will look at me and go, oh, look, you've made it and you've done so much, but I still look at me as Bob Lung from Canton, Ohio. So, I'm always honored that anybody actually reach out and say, hey, will you come on the show and talk about stuff? Because it just always catches me off guard, but I'm touched that we have, but I just love doing them. And certainly any time that we're raising money, I think those always, when we go on Sal's Potathon and your guys' stuff, and I did one Warrior Bowl one and did stuff with Murph over in England. All of those are all special because we're helping somebody that is less fortunate. So that certainly always rings true as well.
Yeah, obviously, and really good things there. I mean, obviously, it's so cool that you were just like, hey, I want players on my team who are more consistent, and that has turned into this, really cool thing that you're doing. And then it's not just like for you, you're giving back, and that's such a cool thing to see. And so maybe the answer here is ultimately, your hobbies would be charity, but your full-time job is accounting. You've got a pretty full plate when it comes to fantasy sports as your hobby. What would if you had never been bitten by the fantasy football bug, what do you think? What do you think would fill your time?
I'm sure it'd have been something that just would have caught something. I always look at, I guess I'm always looking for something, trying to figure out something that, I think that the term is find a need and fill it. And it's something I learned early on in both the professional world and in kind of in the charity world is, there's always a need for something to be done. And you look at this consistency stuff, I looked at it and said, hey, damn, my team was more consistent. I wonder if I could help others with this. Here's a need. Let's fill it. So I created, and I didn't know that in 1999 that Tristan Cockcroft was doing consistency on ESPN. He told me that. I didn't even know it because I said I started in 2002, and he goes, I started in 1999. I'm like, oh, okay. And again, it wasn't that he wasn't being crappy with me. He wasn't being, he was just saying, I just said, and I've always said, I knew I didn't create it. And he brought up the fact that, he was doing consistency stuff in 99. And I said, it's great. But does anybody know Tristan Cockcroft as being the consistency guy? And that was the thing. It's like, when I got into this, I wasn't, I was going to focus 100% on being the best, most respected person in this scenario, in this genre, whatever you want to call it. I wanted to do what I was doing the best I could do with the most information I could provide, with as many twists. Every year I try to find new twists and new ways of taking this stuff and make it into something more helpful for the fantasy world. The Expo was a find a need and fill it. Hey, we don't have a fantasy football expo worth of crap in the United States or anywhere. Let's do one. Okay. All right. Let's do it. I don't have any experience putting an expo together. Now I had friends in the industry that could help me. I had a friend that worked for the hotels, and I had friends that have done events, and I asked all of them, hey, how do you do this? What do you do that? How do you do that? But again, it was a find a need and fill it. And I feel like that's probably what I would have done without fantasy football. I would have found something else. I mean, I played fantasy baseball too, a little bit, not too much. But, I'm sure it had been something like that. I don't know what it would have been, but I'm sure it had been something like that.
Well, thankfully you did choose this, and I appreciate you opening up about your feud with Tristan Cockcroft. I'm sure that'll, I'm glad you guys moved past that. Yeah. But at some point, people helped you out. I mean, like, you obviously, nobody gets to where they ultimately are and be successful without people that are helping them. You talk a lot about helping others. Who are some of the people who have helped you to get to where you are?
So back in the early 2000s, I was on a fantasy sports bulletin board site. That was kind of the thing in the early 2000s, was fantasy bulletin board sites. You would post things and ask questions, and now it's called Twitter and DMs. But back then it was bulletin board sites. And so there was a site called Roto Junkie, and I was on there, and, then I came up with this consistency thing. And so, I started writing, and I started asking these guys, what do you think of this? What do you think of that? And, they were all, very helpful in their ideas of what they thought would make sense and didn't make sense, and that kind of stuff. The amazing thing to me is that out of that group at Roto Junkie, now I don't know how much you guys are into fantasy baseball at all. Okay.
Yes, I am.
So, have you ever heard of Jason Collette?
Yeah.
Paul Sporer, Todd Zola, and oh God, who's the guy that did the Forecaster? Jesus, he was like one of the biggest names, and I just went brain dead on him.
I'm not an expert. I don't think it was Jesus.
Oh yeah, it wasn't. He wrote the Baseball Forecaster. Hold on, I gotta look this up because this is gonna drive me nuts because this is very important.
I got you. Keep talking about it. I'm gonna look it up. Baseball Forecaster.
Baseball Forecaster. Now, Ron Chandler.
Oh yeah, God, of course.
So Ron Chandler had been doing the. I think it was back then. I think they're now in like the, 43rd edition, but I think he was probably back then, in edition 12. And all of those guys were also on that site. Now, Chandler was a well-known figure. Zola was pretty well-known. Jason and Paul were just like me. No experience, just had a love for fantasy sports. Theirs was baseball. Mine was football. All of us came out of that site and have become fairly prominent members. Now those guys are obviously much bigger in the baseball world. But Ron Chandler had been doing a book for 12 years. And, about 3 or 4 years into writing articles and stuff like that, I kind of posted like, look, I don't think anybody's listening. I don't think anybody cares. This is a waste of time. And, Ron popped in to the bulletin board and said, look, I had the same attitude when I first started, that he had a very analytic, he came up with a lot of the analytics that today in fantasy baseball. He came up with them. And he said, most people thought I was dumb. You're being nerdy. It's being dorky. It's, why are we looking at all these numbers? This is all a waste of time. He goes, I got the same stuff. And he goes, but yet, I'm in my 12th year of my book, and, it's becoming very successful. So don't give up. And I didn't. And thank goodness I didn't. So, yeah, so those guys from Roto Junkie, Paul, Jason, they're all still in Todd. I don't talk to Ron very much, but definitely Jason, Paul, and Todd were all very supportive, always promoted me, even though they were baseball guys, always, kind of putting in a good word for me with some of the bigger names in the football world then to kind of, hey, you should have Bob. Do you see his consistency stuff? We think this is really cool. You should look into this. So, those guys are all very helpful, very supportive. And I've always had the utmost respect for all those guys and what they did for me. Yeah.
I love that because I know you're one of those individuals who've helped me along the way here. I think since we've gone back to that consistency guide you gave me way back when. We've had that constant communication since then. I've been fortunate enough to be the token Canadian, but now we got 2 of them in the Dawson division. So right. I could come up to the Bland if you absolutely needed someone. But we talked about, we got the Expo coming out. We'll let you touch base on that a little bit. I guess the big question is, when's the 2021 consistency guide get published? When's that come out?
So
what do you have? Sorry, Bob. And what else do you have in store for the off season?
Well, the consistency guide is definitely, in the works. I started pretty much right after the season ends. And, the stats are pretty much done. The profiles are almost done. Not the writing part, just the stats and putting it into the Word doc. It's a long process because it's all done manually. But the goal, just like last year, well, I shouldn't say just like last year. The normal goal is usually May 1st. Now, last year I got it out in early April because of COVID, and people were like, just, Bob, do something, whatever you can do to get this thing out early. We're bored out of our skulls. We need something to read. So I did. And then updated it quite a bit during the summer, but probably shooting for May 1st again. I actually got the cover done, or I didn't get the cover done. My graphic guy got the new cover, and as usual, he did an amazing job. It's super cool and colorful. And I'll probably be posting that later this week. It was funny. It got done the exact same time I was about to announce the Expo, and I didn't want to overwhelm everybody. So that'll be coming out early May. And, there's all kinds of cool stuff coming. Pretty much same stuff in the guide, not too much new, but, obviously all the new numbers and some of the players that kind of broke out and some of the players that kind of fell apart. So we'll see. It's a tough year to analyze because of COVID and because of injuries. And it's tough to say, well, this guy sucked last year when half his line, offensive line was out and there were some tough scenarios going on. So it's kind of hard to judge, but the numbers are there. We'll talk about them. I'll analyze them, and we'll definitely have some good rankings for everybody to rely on.
One of my favorite things about the series that we're doing is, there's people watching now, and this is going to be on YouTube, and it's going to be stored in the Behind the Grind, and it's going to be, a lot of great names there. And, we talk a little bit about football, but that's the only thing that's really going to date this. Like, this is something that I'm hoping people can look at and listen to for a long time. And one of the questions we always like to close with as we get to the end here is, like, somebody who's watching this, who's like trying to make it in fantasy sports, or trying to make a name for themselves. I guess it could be any industry, but so I guess specifically here, like, what do you have any advice for them, or what are maybe some common mistakes, just some things that you would like to share with them?
Yeah, I mean, the one thing I tell everybody is you can only do so much with stats, but if any way you can be different, and I don't mean different in a bad way. Don't be an a-hole. Don't be the fantasy counselor or whatever that guy's name is. Don't be that person. It's a very respectable industry with a lot of people who will be more than happy to promote you and help you. But if you're going to differentiate yourself, which is the key, because everybody, has the same stats to work with, try to look at some new ways of, kind of analyzing the data and looking at players but you've got to, stay consistent with the presentation. Make sure it makes sense. Make sure you understand that you're going to be wrong and you have to admit that. And when you are, explain why, and be, get out there and promote it and talk with people and share your ideas. Again, but the key is respect. I mean, I've heard a lot of stuff. I don't get on Twitter too much in the off season. I don't get on Twitter too much during the regular season. I pretty much promote the stuff I promote, but I don't get out there and try to argue people that, hey, you're an idiot because this guy's really consistent and, you think he's not. And, I did that a little bit and I just found that pretty much I got trolled and I didn't need it. And so I just kind of stepped away from it. I love coming on these kind of things where I can share my ideas. We can, and I don't have a problem with if you disagree with me, that's all good. But if you're going to get in this industry, if you're going to try to do something, you've got to be a little bit different. You've got to be a little bit unique, whether it's the ideas, the data, the presentation, whatever the case may be. But you gotta get out there and you gotta work hard, and you may not make much money. You may not get signed by a big site. There's certainly people who are getting signed, and that's good. I mean, I've seen Troy King and Stephanie Smalls and some of these other folks that, are getting signed by Full-Time Network and footballguys.com, and good for them, because I think I've seen them really go out there and work hard and present good ideas. That's what these sites are looking for. But again, you're going to be working, a lot. You're going to be working hard. You're not going to make a lot of money. There's not a lot of people that work full time in this industry. And, I don't work full time in this industry. I may put 40 hours a week into this industry sometimes, but, again, you've got to do it for the love of what you're doing, why you're writing about it, whether it's video or podcast or articles or whatever you're doing. You just gotta stay focused, stay consistent with what you're doing, what you're presenting, and be respectful of others and do your best. I mean, it may frustrate you and you may quit, and a lot of people do. But it's, the ones that have persevered, like all of us sitting here, got here. I mean, I think it's funny. The one thing I remember was a couple of years ago when my guide did win the best publication, and I went on a podcast of somebody that didn't know my background very well. And they said, Bob, it's amazing that, you've just kind of came out of nowhere as you're kind of like not a 1 year wonder, but I forget what he called it. Kind of kind of came out of nowhere. And I said, yeah, well, 17 years it took to get out of nowhere was worth it. And, and he's like, wait a minute, you've been doing this for 17 years? I'm like, yeah, I didn't just create this stuff like 2 years ago. I mean, it's been around for a long time. It's just got to this point that I finally could get it out there. And, that's fine. I was raising a family. I had a full-time job. I had 3 daughters. I just had enough time to do what I could do. And now I have more time. And so now I'm doing more stuff. So it really is just, it's a grind, and, It's what it's all about.
It is, and that's why we're behind the grind. You mentioned nice segue. I love how things just when they just work together, they just work. You know.
Yeah.
You mentioned selling yourself and making sure you sell yourself out there to the community. Bob, sell yourself to us right now. Let the people know some more information on this expo. Well, not don't sell yourself like that, but sell yourself. So the expo, where can they log in? Where can they get some information? Where can they get some tickets?
Right. So let's talk about the Expo. Expo will be at Canton, Ohio, Sunday, August 15th. But here's the thing. Here's what I want everybody to do. We all need this break. We all need to get away from COVID. We all need to meet people. So make a weekend out of it. So come to Canton, Ohio on Friday night, August 13th. Spend the weekend, Saturday and Sunday. On Saturday, if you go to thefantasyfootballexpo.com, we actually have ticket packages. So there's one called the weekend package. It's only $65, and it gets you special discounts for your hotel. So you save like $40 just from that. You get a ticket to the Hall of Fame, so you can come on Saturday and visit the Pro Football Hall of Fame. And while you're there, we will be drafting in the Kings Classic, and let's hope that Matt will make it down and be there as well. So you can come say hi to us because they allow the doors to be open. You can come in and watch it live. So that's Saturday. Saturday night, huge party at the hotel, bar, and restaurant. All of us will be there. It's a great time. 2 years ago, we did it at BW3s, but then you got to drive and Ubers, and so it's all the hotel, so you don't have to go anywhere. Sunday is the expo all day from 10 to 4. It's going to be a great time. We got 45 booths of all the top folks will be coming. I'm hoping to get, this is still in the works, so I'm not going to guarantee the attendance of who, but we're going to do at 10 a.m. what's called the pregame. And the goal is to have Mike Clay, Brad Evans, Michael Fabiano, Andy Behrens, and Dave Richard all on stage together for a Q&A session for at least an hour that you can come and meet them, say hi to them. And so that's going to kick off the expo itself. You're going to get a T-shirt, swag bag with over $100 worth of coupons for all the sites in it. You get to come to the party. You get drink specials. It's like a $200 value for $65. So that's the best deal. Everybody's been buying that so far. The hotel's really nice. They just remodeled it, brand new, outdoor patio just outside the bar. It's really nice. So that's what the expo is all about. Like I said, thefantasyfootballexpo.com. If you're a fantasy expert site out there, like these guys, get a booth, come down, sell your wares, promote your stuff, that's what it's all about. It's, about selling your site and your expertise, and then network with all of us and, meet us and, hopefully we can share each other's knowledge and, again, get people on our own expo or our own podcast. And that's where a lot of this all happened from last 2 years ago was, a lot of people got me on their podcast because they got to meet me for the first time, and they still put me on. It's amazing. But definitely come to it. Like I said, thefantasyfootballexpo.com, at the FF Expo on Twitter, because you're not allowed to go over 15 characters in your name. I didn't know that. So I couldn't do the Fantasy Football Expo. So it's the FF Expo. And it's all over Twitter. So it shouldn't be hard to find. Or just find mine at Bob_Lung, and you'll see it there as well. So, but again, guys, thank you for having me. I appreciate your love and support. Have been for a number of years now. And, Matt, I'm glad you got to be in the Kings Classic, and I hope you can make it down and draft there from Canton, Ohio, and come visit the Hall of Fame this summer as well.
Yeah, I'm just disappointed there. I'm just disappointed that when you mentioned those names that I could possibly do that Q&A, that I couldn't be there because there's so much uncertainty about the border and crossing into Canada.
Yeah, I get it.
So I had to turn that opportunity down, but maybe in 2022 I can help you out there a little bit.
Sure.
So I just want to say, Fabs, if you're watching, thanks for stepping up this year. I appreciate that. I don't even believe what I just said.
I'm sure Fabs will be very excited to hear that.
Oh, I'm sure. And just like that, we're closing out episode 49 of the Dynasty Vipers ViperCast for Calvin and Hobby, for myself, and for the four-time FSWA nominated best publication, Mr. Consistency himself, Bob Long. We gone.